Hi and welcome. I'm your professor, Dr. Lisa English Dowdell, and let's talk about the business of UI and UX. So, in the beginning of digital design era, there wasn't a profession as UI or UX designer. If a company, say, was looking for a good website to promote their services, they only had two options, either a graphic designer or a webmaster. Now, today, UX and UI professionals can help companies, say, increase sales, retain customers, and improve their brand value. Research estimates suggest that every dollar invested in UX brings $100 in return. So that's a return on investment of nearly 10,000%. And this number is continuously growing. So UI and UX design, it's a critical aspect of the tech industry as it deals with the design and development of user interfaces and user experiences for digital products such as websites, apps, and software. A UI UX designer is responsible for creating designs that are not only visually appealing but also easy to use and navigate. And this includes designing layouts, color schemes, and typography, as well as creating icons and other visual elements. Now, the designer must also ensure that the user interface is consistent with, say, the overall brand and design of the product. Now, a UI UX designer must possess a combination of technical skills, problem solving skills, and communication skills to be able to effectively design and develop digital products. Now, the job requires collaboration and communication with other team members, as well as the ability to think creatively and produce innovative solutions. And they must also be able to articulate their design choices and their decisions to team members and to stakeholders. Now, analytical skills are also important as they allow the designer to be able to make informed decisions based on research and data. And in addition, UI and UX designers, they must stay up to date with the latest design trends and technology and must be willing to continuously improve their skills. Now, the tech industry is constantly evolving, and a designer must be able to adapt to new technologies and design principles in order to be able to create possible or the best possible user interfaces and user experiences. And this requires a willingness to learn and to improve one's skills continuously. So in today's digital era, a well-designed user experience and user interface makes a website or an app more engaging, trustworthy, and accessible. And that's why an increasing number of companies are looking for talented user interface and user experience designers who can transform the digital presence of their business through optimized interfaces, improved usability, and human centered design. Now, it should come as no surprise that user experience researcher and user interface designer are among the top 100 best jobs in America with a projected growing rate of 19% and 20% respectively, according to CNN Money Pay Scale's Best Jobs in America. Now, with many companies placing a stronger focus on strategic design, there has never been a better time to pursue a career in the field of UX and UI design. So, let's first examine the difference between UX and UI designers. Now, job titles like UX or UI designer, they're confusing to the uninitiated and unfamiliar, even to designers who say come from other industries. UI design is all about the visual appearances of a product and is a subset of UX design. So take a food app as an example. So a UI designers are more concerned about how to arrange UI elements and layouts, so that the user can pick their desired food and drink smoothly. However, UX designers are more concerned about how to offer a pleasant experience while choosing dishes and drinks, including like which color scheme can let users feel more comfortable, which buttons or UI copies can evoke users' emotions, which UI or interaction flow can make users feel better, so on like that. So user interface and user experience, they kind of go hand in hand. Some designers choose to do both, while others prefer to deepen their expertise in one part. It's not uncommon for UX designers to pick up like UI design skills and vice versa. And you'll also notice that a lot of companies will advertise for UI slash UX designers or UX slash UI designers. Like I said, UX designers are primarily concerned with how the product feels. They explore many different approaches to solving like a specific user problem. The broad responsibility of a UX designer is to ensure that the product logically flows from one step to the next. Now, one way that a UX designer might do this is by conducting in-person user tests to observe one's behavior. Now, by identifying verbal and say nonverbal stumbling blocks, they refine and iterate to create the best user experience. As a UX designer working at a smaller company, you likely have a more general role with responsibilities for each step of the design process. But at a larger company, you might focus on one specialty or facet of UX design, like information architecture, UX research, usability analysis, UX writing, UX engineering, or interactive design. Now, unlike UX designers who are concerned with the overall feel of the product, user interface designers are particular about how the product is laid out. They're in charge of designing each screen or page with which a user interacts and ensuring that the UI visually communicates the path that a UX designer has laid out. Now, UI designers are also typically responsible for creating like a cohesive style guide and ensuring that a consistent design language is applied across the product. Maintaining consistency in visual elements and defining behavior, such as how to display errors or warnings, states fall under the purview of a UI designer. Now, in UI design, even more specific or an even more specific role is a visual designer or a graphic designer. Now, a visual designer is one who pushes pixels. If you ask a non-designer what a designer does, this is probably what kind of comes to mind first. Visual designers are not concerned on how screens link to each other, nor how someone interacts with the product. Instead, their focus is on crafting beautiful icons, controls, and visual elements, and making use of suitable typography. Now, visual designers sweat the small details that others might overlook and frequently operate at like a 4x to an 8x zoom level in Photoshop. Um, Produce high quality visual designs from, say, concept to execution, including those for desktop, web, and mobile devices at a say variety of different resolutions. This is what a visual designer does. They create and iterate on assets that reflect a brand, enforce a language, inject beauty and life into a product. It's also fairly common for UI designers to pull double duty and create the final pixel perfect asset as well. Some companies choose not to have, say, a separate visual designer role. Now, unlike visual designers who usually deal with static assets, motion designers, they create the animation inside of an app. They deal with what the interface does after a user touches it. So, for example, they decide how a menu should slide in, what transition effects to use, and how a button should maybe fan out. When done well, motion becomes an integral part of the interface by providing like visual clues, as to how to use the product. The key difference between UX and interaction design is the way we think about our user interactions. Interaction designers are focused on the moment when the user interacts with the product, and their goal is to improve the interaction experience. The responsibility of the interaction designer includes creating prototypes to test concepts. Now, here are two areas where the impact of interaction designers is especially significant. One is through design strategy. The interaction designer, they always start with understanding what the target user is trying to accomplish. What's their goals, and then finding interactions that will help to achieve those goals. Now, interaction designers might have to conduct user research and find out more about those goals. And then the other area is using prototyping tools. So interaction designers, they often create interactive prototypes to lay out the interactions. Now, sometimes in order to make the interaction obvious for the user, interaction designers they create interactive prototypes that look exactly like the actual products. UI and interaction designers are essentially distinct roles in bigger organizations. There is, however, no rule that restricts you from to take up both of these roles. Just like UX designers, interaction designers also need to follow UX design processes. Now, a UX researcher is the champion of the user's needs. The goal of a researcher is to answer the twin questions of who are our users and what do our users want. Typically, this role entails interviewing users, researching market data, and gathering findings. Now, design is a process of constant iteration. And so researchers may assist with this process by conducting like A/B tests to tease out like which design option best satisfies the user's need. UX researchers are typically mainstays at a large company where the access to a plethora of data gives them ample opportunity to draw statistically significant conclusions. Now, when we talk about A/B tests, those refer to a randomized experimentation process where two or more versions of the website or the app are compared. Now, the role of a UX researcher is to uncover user behavior, their needs, and their motivations in order to make products and services and websites a little bit more intuitive and enjoyable for those users. So, using qualitative and quantitative methods, they conduct comprehensive research and share the insights from research with the UX designers. Now, UX designers also occasionally carry out the role of UX researchers. Both positions will work closely with one another as the UX designer will use the insight the UX researcher provides. Now, UX research is important to reduce uncertainty at every stage of decision making. Now, through understanding of the user, their wants, and their needs, we can inform the UX design process to create a more optimized product for users, ultimately reaping the business benefits. Now, here's an example of a UI and UX designer that was posted. This is an entry level that was posted on LinkedIn. So, as they're saying here, they're going to be a part of the team. The person will be developing prototypes and should have experience using design systems. So, for requirements, they're asking for 3+ years experience. Experience using design systems, so on and so forth, and a strong portfolio with samples. And I want to emphasize this because as that's what's going to really sell you, this is a visual type job. So they want to see what you can actually do. Okay, and then of course, these are some of the responsibilities. Let's take a look at another one. Okay, this one is also at entry level. And this one's asking for a degree or um, a, of a design degree or related field, they're also asking for 5+ years of experience as a UI UX designer. And also looking for somebody that's proficient in HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. So again, you take a look at some of these job responsibilities, some of the job requirements for these different positions. A lot of times, as you can see, a lot of them want you come in with experience. So how do we get that experience? Either, not really working in this role, but working in a web design company, learning about UI and UX design, maybe doing some volunteer work, working with smaller companies that maybe don't require, a lot of experience. Um, but these are just give you a couple of ideas of what they're actually looking for as far as designers. But personally, I would recommend having that strong portfolio. And even if it's just things that you've designed yourself, you've taken a look at existing websites and you wanted to see how you could improve them. So you created something, a mock-up, in your portfolio, or maybe you did some charity work, or maybe you did some personal, maybe created some personal websites or apps and things like that, where you can actually show um, the different designs that you've done. So let's talk about some of the skills that are required for the UI and UX designer jobs. We kind of looked at a few of those, but let's kind of talk a little bit more detail about that. So both UX designers and UI designers use visual design software like Figma or Sketch or Photoshop or Illustrator to create the visual elements of a product. So, besides proficiency in these tools, you should build your knowledge of visual design best practices for things like typography, color theory, layout, icons, and general design theory, as we've been studying in this course. And then prototypes and mock-ups are often require like special UX software. So if you're just getting started, consider working with maybe one of the free options, like Origami Studio, um, or maybe some popular paid prototyping tools like Mockups or Sketch or Adobe XD. These typically will either be free or they'll come with like a free trial, which allows you to design some prototypes without really having to subscribe to a license or anything. Now, alternatively, practice prototyping just using a paper prototyping method, with a simple pen and paper. Now, while UX designers are not generally expected to write code, that's a task for developers. It can help to have like a basic understanding of application development, including languages like JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. Understanding how applications are developed can help you as a UX designer, like in a lot of different ways. One, you'll have more realistic expectations of what's possible in your design. You'll be able to better communicate and collaborate with the design team. You might even be more marketable in a small startup company that hires for a wide range of skills. And then you'll have a basic coding skill should you choose to move into like UX engineering or UI development. Now, as a UX UI designer, you'll be collaborating, with other teams on like a regular basis. So depending on the project and the phase of development, you might want to work with leadership, or you might need to work with leadership in order to define like business goals, user interface designers, um, to add like maybe visual elements to a mock-up or a high fidelity prototype, or you might be working with like developers to translate your design into code. So, working as part of a team also means knowing how to give and receive feedback and incorporate new ideas on how to make the best possible products. Now, communication and collaboration, these go hand in hand. So, it's not just your team you'll be communicating with. Strong communication skills help you to get more valuable data, say from your customers, when conducting like your user research, and build enthusiasm in like your stakeholders, when presenting your designs. Now, good UX often relies on effective visual communication and written communication as well. So you'll want to demonstrate your skills through a portfolio of work. Compile the projects you finished, in your course room, or your coursework. Maybe any like volunteer work that you might have done, or maybe some unsolicited redesigns. And then continue to add your best work, as you gain more experience. Now, there's a lot of resources out there for creating a design portfolio. So I've listed a few here that are free or offer a free account that you could actually, create a whole portfolio and make it available, for like potential, employers or even clients or customers. Now, one thing I want to talk about is case studies, because case studies, they're essential elements within your portfolio. And you should feature the projects, say, that you're proudest of first, okay? Now, in crafting your case studies, remember who your target audience is. These are design managers and recruiters. They're not really looking to see the fanciest website, but they are looking to see if you have the skill set to be a UX designer, a researcher, or so on. Now, the skills you want to demonstrate are product strategy, meaning you have a good problem statement. They also want to see interaction design or visual design. Can you create products that are easy and intuitive to use? Do you understand typography and layout? The folks looking at your portfolio, they're quickly looking through it. So you want to kind of stand out, by having like a very polished visual design. Now, in your case study, talk about the why and how. Some designers include personas, but personas are very general and they don't really provide a lot of value to your case study. Have a narrative structure to outline your case study. Use a framework that's like the UX design process. Here's an example of the components in a case study. So you want to have a project title. You want to have a client or company or project type. You want to list that out. And then you want to have the project date, what your role was in the project, a summary about the project, what was the project about. Then the challenge, what specific problem, user need, business requirements, or pain points, that the project solves. And then for your solution, you want to have like what method or process was used to solve the specific problems, the user needs, business requirements, or the pain points. How did features address the objectives? So basically, like in the solutions section, this section is going to be your longest, as it's going to really showcase like how the project goals were achieved. So what you want to do is firstly, you want to outline the design process steps and methods followed during the projects, outlining the layout, in this section. And then you want to show your overall project steps, why you chose the methods that you chose. Recruiters, they want to see all the relevant design artifacts, that you produce, from like any sketches that you might have had, you want to show those, or any visual mock-ups to any prototypes. So you want to show everything. Again, you want to just show that whole design process, how you got from A to Z, and all the different artifacts, the design artifacts that accompany those steps. Okay. And then the critical last section is going to be the results section. And this basically kind of concludes the case study by outlining like any project success metrics that were achieved, any awards that were won. In the case of a project that say is not live, reflections and project's next steps, are going to be sufficient to round up the case study. Try to share any lessons that you learned, to demonstrate that you're invested in both the project's life cycle and your career in development. Now, when talking about the business of UI and UX, we should also talk about how UX groups are structured. So within an organization. So let's just talk about some of these. So a fully centralized model. Okay. Now, with a fully centralized, that's our first one that we're going to discuss. This is a model where a UX manager and UX people report to him or her, and the UX practitioners work on the various products and efforts as needed, basically as consultants. So when a product or project team say needs UX support, the UX manager will communicate back and forth with the project team's lead to fully understand the need. And then the UX manager then assigns a UX team member to the project for a specific amount of time based on alignment between the project's needs and the skill sets and the availability of the UX team member. Now, when the project is complete, the assigned UX team member returns to, say, the resource pool to wait for another assignment. Now, common benefits of a fully centralized model approach are a UX manager or an executive level UX person is highly invested in UX. They understand the discipline and can describe and champion for and defend UX and be the budget and the resource custodian. Also, in a fully centralized model, individuals gain a wide range of knowledge about the various products at the organization and often connect product teams who otherwise say would not work together. Now, the UX team shares design and research intelligence and cultivates like UX expertise, processes, and growth. Now, another benefit is having shared resources among the UX team. A shared UX toolbox, like maybe templates for common deliverables, a database of user research insights, maybe some work agendas, things like that. It helps teams avoid reinventing the wheel every time a tool or process is needed. And a shared research participant database helps teams overcome the very common roadblock of participation recruitment, say when doing user research. However, there are some drawbacks to having the fully centralized model. Like if the central group is also a chargeback center, then the UX is tasked with not only convincing teams to do UX, but also paying for it. And another drawback is that the product team might forget that UX resources even exist because they're not part of their team, and that they're available. And they might not even involve UX in planning or any other important meetings. Now, the next model is the hybrid model with central UX group. So in this model, although individual UX groups are embedded within business units, in order to handle the UX projects for those business units, the funding is centralized, and the central UX group is responsible for company-wide UX efforts. Now, an advantage of this model is that the business units perceive the UX groups as a member of the team. So they get better buy-in. Now, because UX professionals partner long-term with an individual product team, other project members will be likely to view UX staff as a true part of their team, involving them in critical conversations, meetings, and activities. And also, it allows individual UX resources to gain greater domain knowledge because they're part of that team. Now, another benefit is that it ensures a common look and feel across products within, say, a business unit. However, this model makes keeping the UX brand consistent a little harder because each individual UX tribe kind of tends to form. So in this model, UX professionals, they're accountable to the business unit, but not as tightly to, say, the central UX group. And then the last one is the hybrid model with more distributed UX resources. Now, in this hybrid model, UX teams are funded by and distributed into the business units. The UX leaders that manage the UX teams within a hybrid model might also reside in either the central UX group or the business units as well. Now, sometimes hybrid models use a matrix organization model in which the UX teams report directly to, say, a central UX leader and are also kind of a dotted line reporting to a business unit leader or vice versa. Now, it's a common instance of a hybrid model um, that in this particular hybrid model that UX staff is distributed across many teams, where they act as say long-term resources and team members. Depending on organizational structures, their team might align to a specific feature or product or domain or line of business. Now, day to day direction is provided by and supervised by the business unit team lead. Um, However, a UX manager or executive also provides oversight. Um, Often, alignment and collaboration among individual UX team members is retained with UX-wide meetings, such as design reviews or communities of practice. So this way, you kind of get all of your UX staff together, periodically to talk about various different things like career development, personal growth perspective, things like that, best practices. Now, the central UX group focuses on a process, education, infrastructure, design standards, and just a few like key design projects, okay? But the disadvantage now to this model is that UX people can sometimes feel pulled in multiple directions by two different managers. You've got the the business unit manager and the UX manager. You know, However, it can also be a benefit by having two managers taking responsibility, say, for an individual's success and thus the success of UX in general. Now, another advantage is that the UX person stays with the same product team for some time so that the business unit team members kind of think of them as part of their team. Now, the problems with this model might arise because the UX resources might be allocated to non UX roles when, say, business unit leaders need other skill sets or don't understand UX well. Also, it could be kind of difficult to move UX people across business units. UX resources kind of become then specialized and have to say, quit the job in order to, in one group, in order to say move to another. Sometimes in maybe resulting in them leaving the company. So I'll try to provide some additional links and things like that that really kind of visualize as far as these different models. But thank you for watching, and this is the business of UI and UX.